Hey, Richard Bryce here, tennis hacker. I'm back out on court working on my left-handed forehand. Now, as a recap, I'm naturally a right-handed player, but I separated my collarbone in a mountain bike crash. I can't play right-handed anymore, so I'm trying to become the best player that I can left-handed. Hopefully, I'll be able to get to the point where I'm playing 5.0 tennis and then competing on the seniors tour. I've done okay, but I've still got a ways to go. I'm really focusing on my forehand at the moment, and honestly I have been for the whole of the last 2 years. For whatever reason, the left-handed backhand, both my single-hander and my slice, they've come fairly naturally to me. I think it's probably because my forehand was my strongest shot with my right hand, so I've got such good leg drive with my right hip, so I'm really kind of having to correct that and fix that issue with my forehand on the left-hand side. So I've made videos about some of the other things that I've been working on, but now I'm trying to kind of smooth out the final piece of the puzzle, which is the timing, and more specifically the timing on higher balls, especially when they're floating. And this is kind of the nemesis of so many 4.0, 4.5 players. If someone hits the ball hard at you, you can return it, it's pretty easy. But when the ball is kind of floating, that's where it gets a little bit trickier. So that's the problem that I'm trying to solve at the moment, is just trying to get the timing and smooth it out so that I've got a reliable forehand that I can use under pressure. So I want to start by showing you what the end goal is, so what I'm working to try and be able to achieve, and then I'm going to take you through the training session that I did today so you can see how I'm actually working on things, and I'll explain what I'm thinking about to try and implement the changes that I'm trying to make happen. I'm feeding myself a deep floating ball that's got quite a lot of topspin on, and all I'm trying to do is send it back cross court and deep, and this will be to my opponent's backhand if I'm playing a right-handed player. I'm not trying to hit the ball hard, I'm just trying to get the timing for now. So in terms of timing, what I mean is I want to make contact with the ball way out in front of my body, but I also want to do it in a certain way. So I'm trying to be efficient with my kinetic chain. I'm trying to initiate the swing, starting by driving through my left hip, so I'm throwing my left hip forwards. As that happens, I also allow my racket to drop, and I want my racket to drop just a little bit below the height of the ball, but then I'm trying to get the transference of energy, so I drive through my hip and my torso and my arm and my wrist. They all fire, and I've done all the hard work by the time I make contact with the ball. So I'm really trying to be efficient and make sure that the moment that I contact the ball, my wrist is nice and relaxed because I've already done all of the hard work. And as a final point in terms of what I'm practicing, I'm trying to keep my head as stable as I can for a moment or two after contact. Now I'm just going to replay that last one a couple of times because this was the best shot in terms of timing out of the balls that I've showed you so far. And I want you to look, you can see that my racket kind of whips through after contact, and that's because I got the timing done early enough and my wrist was nice and loose at the moment of contact. So this is what I'm trying to achieve as often as I can. Okay, so now I want to show you how I structured my practice session so you can start to see how I work on things, because it might look a little bit different to what you're thinking. What I've just shown you there was the end result that I was working towards, which came at the end of the session. But I did a lot of work starting in shorter in the service boxes and gradually moving back. And the reason I did this is because the less distance the ball has to travel, the easier it is to read the flight of the ball and predict where the ball is going, and that makes the timing component easier. So that's why I started up close, and I was doing a couple of different variations in each position. So I was doing an open stance and I was doing neutral stance. Now generally when the ball is this high, I would normally try and go for an open stance, but to really try and cement my timing, I feel like it's going to be a good thing moving forward to me to also work on neutral stance, just so I can really program my brain to understand the spacing and the timing requirements. In each position, I also worked with two different types of spin as well. So some of the balls may look fairly similar in terms of the initial flight, but some of them were a little bit flatter and some of them had heavier spin. So I did kind of sets of each to help calibrate my brain to respond appropriately in terms of the timing of my movements, getting the racket drop and releasing my racket head at the right time relative to the different balls that I was dealing with. So the next couple of clips that we're going to look at are still from the service line, obviously, but they're a much spinnier ball, so the ball's kicking into me a little bit quicker. And with these two clips, I want to point out two additional things that I'm thinking about and working on as I go through. The first one is going to be the spacing. When you're taking a ball from shoulder height or above shoulder height, so taking it up high, you need to be much further away from the ball than when you're taking it low. So this is something that I have to consciously think about on an ongoing basis, because I spent basically 25 years hitting a one-handed backhand with my right hand, and the spacing for a one-handed backhand is completely different. You get much closer on a one-handed backhand than you do on a high forehand. So although I don't have to move very far, I'm still at the process of kind of consciously getting the reps in, thinking about ensuring that I'm far enough away from the ball to give me space to hit kind of in an inside-out shape and use the optimal biomechanics. The second thing that I want to point out here is the abbreviated racket drop position, because after the unit turn, before you initiate the forward swing, so right around the time that you're driving through your hip, you basically have to choose where you're going to allow the racket drop. So gravity is going to take it part of the way there, but you're going to influence that, and depending on the shot that you're dealing with, you're going to do the racket drop in slightly different ways. So here I'm pushing it out to about a 45-degree angle. So I'm abbreviating it so it takes less time because the ball's got spin on it and it's going to kick into me. So I'm making that adjustment. If I had more time, so maybe it was less spin or it was a slightly different type of ball, I'd potentially push my racket back a little bit further because I've got more space to work with. And again, this is something that I'm in the process of kind of consciously thinking on all the time that I'm practicing. Obviously here I've got the ball machine set up, so I know roughly what feed I'm going to get. When you're playing against an opponent, then it's different. You have to watch what they're doing, watch the way they make contact with the ball, watch their swing path to try and get an idea of how much spin is going to be on the ball, so that then you can kind of make this adjustment based on that. After working at the service line, I moved back to halfway between the service line and baseline again to increase the flight of the ball, to change the visual prediction component. But then everything else was the same. I worked on an open stance with a flat ball, I worked on an open stance with a spinnier ball, and I worked on a neutral stance with a flatter ball and a neutral stance with a spinnier ball. But the focal points were exactly the same. I'm trying to consciously think about my spacing. I'm trying to make sure that I'm far enough away so that I can use that inside-out swing path. I'm trying to get the racket drop that's abbreviated or relative to the ball that I'm dealing with. So when the ball is a little bit heavier in terms of spin, my racket drop is slightly more abbreviated. When I've got more time, it's slightly fuller so that I can hit through the ball a little bit more. And then of course the final piece of the puzzle that I was working on was just trying to keep my head still for a moment after contact. So that's something that's known as quiet eye. It's kind of the icing on the cake. If you get everything else wrong, it's not going to make up for it, but if you get everything else right and then you keep that head stable on contact, it dramatically increases consistency. And then I move back to the baseline and repeat the process. But what I want you to notice is that now that I'm further back, I'm still not trying to crush the ball. I'm just trying to hit it back deep, because at the 4.5 level, I don't need to crush it. I'll be able to win by having good movement, being fast around the court, and out-consistencying my opponents. Now in terms of what I'm thinking on, it remains the same. I'm making sure that I'm getting that spacing so that I'm far enough away from the ball. I have a tendency, or I have in the past, to get too close to the ball, and that messes things up. So I've really got to make sure that I'm far enough away from the ball. And then it's from there, it's all about the timing, trying to initiate driving through that back hip at the right time relative to the ball that I'm dealing with. So sometimes I do it really well, sometimes not so well. I have to consciously think about where's the flight of the ball. It's about to bounce. Do I need to start my swing now, or do I need to wait until the ball is making contact with the ground? And that changes dependent on the amount of spin that's on the ball and how far the ball is traveling. And then at the same time that I'm doing that, again, thinking about trying to judge the amount of racket drop that I need and the direction that I'm going to send it in. You know, do I have time to have a bigger racket drop, or do I need a more abbreviated racket drop at the same time I drive through that hip? Visualizing the contact point out in front, and that's what I'm really focusing on. Okay, so that's how I'm working on things on court. I'm feeding myself a variety of different types of forehand. None of them have got too much speed on at the moment, but they do have a variety of spins and variety of trajectories, because what I have to do is program my brain to understand what the flight of the ball means. So depending on the trajectory, I have to predict when and where the ball is going to arrive so that I can visualize the contact point, so that I can start my swing at the right time, I can get my racket drop appropriately and kind of meet the ball in the correct position relative to the specifics of the speed, spin, trajectory of the shot. As you can see, I'm doing that in an open stance and neutral stance, so that when I'm playing points, whatever forehand arrives, hopefully I've seen it before, my brain understands it, and I can get the correct response. But the on-court work is just a small part of what I do to improve, or try and improve, my tennis. I do a lot of work off the court to improve my skill level, because what I've just described there is very challenging. You need the ability to quickly read where the ball's going, predict what's going to happen, and that comes down to how well the visual system is functioning. So I do a lot of vision training to improve all of the underlying visual skills, and I also work on my coordination, because once we've read and predicted where the ball's going, we then have to sequence our body in the correct order, we have to adjust the speed of our swing, we have to coordinate it, we ultimately have to control the angle of the racket face at the moment of contact, and that takes a lot of coordination. So I do a lot of work on myself to try and improve on an ongoing basis in those areas as well. And that's actually what I help other tennis players with. I have a program where I teach players how to use brain-based training to improve their skill level. So it teaches about vision training, it teaches about coordination training, and by working on things in this way, along with good, solid on-court practice where you're addressing the underlying problems that are going on with your strokes, you can really improve fairly significantly and become a much better player. So it's a little bit different to something like coaching, because when you're having coaching and you're having practice, you've got physical limitations, so you can only do what you can do based on your skill level. But with brain-based training, we can really improve the skill level, and when you do that, it kind of changes what's possible. If you'd like to learn about that, I've got a free class that's going to go into a lot more detail. I'll place a link up there, I'll place a link down in the description. Click on either of those links, or take you to a page where you can register and watch this class. And then towards the end of the class, it's going to give you a little bit more information about my program and how I work with players, if that's something that you're interested in exploring further. Okay, hopefully you have enjoyed this video and you found it to be useful. Any comments about what I've covered here, leave them down below, and I'll catch you next time.